All right, let's dive in. Today, we're tackling sustainable cities. We're talking about building cities that don't just, exist, but actually thrive sustainably.
It's really fascinating how much this whole idea of a sustainable city has evolved, you know?
Yeah, it's definitely not just about like sticking a few solar panels on a roof anymore. Yeah.
Exactly.
So to really understand this, I think we need to rewind a bit. Where did these like core sustainable city principles even come from? Like, was this always a concern or is this a newer thing?
Well, it's kind of both. Cities have always had to think about, managing resources and waste and making sure people are doing okay. I mean, to some extent, right? But this modern concept of sustainable urban development, that really gained traction towards the end of the 20th century.
So like late 1900s.
Yeah. Think about the Brundtland Report in 1987. That really put sustainable development on the map globally.
Right. Meeting the needs of the present without messing it up for future generations.
Exactly. That was huge.
Huge. But how did that translate to cities specifically?
That's where these core principles that we've been talking about come in. Our sources point to things like integration, equity, resilience, and of course, sustainability itself.
Makes sense.
But what's really interesting is how participation has become a key principle too.
Oh, interesting.
It's like acknowledging that top-down planning from, way up high, that doesn't really work. You need people, the folks actually living in these cities, to be a part of the process.
So it's not just like architects and mayors calling all the shots.
Right. Regular people need a voice. They need a seat at the table.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's a much more inclusive approach now.
Way more inclusive. And that shift has been huge, really. It recognizes that you can't separate social justice issues from environmental issues. A city can't be sustainable if it's not equitable. You know what I mean?
That's a great point. But okay, let's get down to earth here.
Yeah.
Literally. You mentioned cities being ecosystems, and I don't know, I usually think of like forests or oceans when I hear that word. How does that work in, a concrete jungle?
Well, that's where this field called urban ecology comes in. It's the study of how nature and us, humans, and all our systems, how we all interact, but within a city. What's surprising is how much biodiversity can actually exist in cities.
Really?
Think about it. Parks, gardens, even those little plants that stubbornly grow up through cracks in the sidewalk.
So it's more than just like pigeons and rats.
Way more. There's a whole world of insects, birds, even small mammals finding their way, adapting to city life.
I guess I never really thought about it that way.
And these aren't just, cute little additions. They actually provide valuable services.
Services? Wait, like what? Delivering takeout faster? Okay, kidding. But seriously, what do you mean?
Think about trees cleaning the air and cooling the city down, or green spaces soaking up rainwater and helping reduce flooding, and even just the mental health benefits of being around nature, All those things, those are ecosystem services, and they have real economic value too.
Wow. So when we just pave over everything, we're not just losing, like, the beauty of nature. We're actually losing practical help.
Exactly. One of the sources we looked at mentioned New York City's decision to invest in protecting the Catskills watershed, which naturally filters their drinking water.
Smart move.
Right. It was way cheaper than building a massive new treatment plant, and they saved billions. Billions.
Okay, that's a pretty strong argument for keeping some green spaces around. But it's hard to be super optimistic with all the doom and gloom about climate change these days. How do cities even stand a chance against that?
That's where the concept of urban resilience comes in. And it's crucial because cities are incredibly vulnerable to climate change, to things like heat waves, floods, rising sea levels, all of it.
Yeah, picturing like Manhattan underwater is not a fun thought.
It's serious. It's a serious threat. But the good news is that cities are also hubs for innovation, right? Yep. So there are so many strategies out there for building resilience, both in terms of adapting to changes we know are going to happen and finding ways to reduce our impact in the first place.
So like putting cities on stilts or inventing like giant air conditioners.
Those are creative ideas. But realistically, it's about combining a lot of different approaches, things like green roofs and permeable pavement that soak up rainwater, early warning systems for extreme heat, strengthening infrastructure, and even moving really important buildings and facilities away from areas that are most vulnerable.
Okay, that all sounds like a massive undertaking.
It is. But there are some really inspiring examples out there. Rotterdam, which is a city partially below sea level, they've been leading the way in water management for decades. They've integrated these water squares, rooftop gardens, all sorts of things to handle flooding.
So they're working with water, not just trying to keep it out.
Exactly. It's about embracing these nature-based solutions. But it's also about building social resilience, too. We need strong communities that can help each other when a crisis hits.
Right. Because it's not just about the physical buildings, it's about the people in them.
Crucial, but often overlooked.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, this is a lot to process. I'm starting to see how this whole sustainable city thing is way more complex than I initially thought.
It's definitely not simple, but that's also what makes it so fascinating, right? Every city has its own unique challenges and opportunities.
That's a good point. So where do we go from here? What can people actually do, to make a difference?
Well, you could argue that the most powerful tool we have is our own behavior. Every choice we make, from how we get around to what we buy, it all has an impact.
So it's not just about waiting for governments or big companies to figure it all out. We can actually make a difference ourselves.
Absolutely. And think about it. Those individual actions, they really add up, especially when you've got millions of people in a city all making those choices.
Right, like a collective effort. Okay, so let's get specific. What are some things people can do, in their daily lives, that actually contribute to a more sustainable city?
One of the biggest areas is transportation. Choosing to walk, bike, or take public transit instead of driving alone can make a huge difference. Less emissions, less congestion. It's a win-win.
Yeah, I've been trying to bike more often, but honestly, sometimes it feels a little dangerous with all the traffic.
I hear you, and that actually highlights a really important point. We need better cycling infrastructure in a lot of cities. Safe, dedicated bike lanes can make a huge difference in encouraging people to choose two wheels over four.
That makes sense. What about those electric scooters and bikes you see everywhere these days? Are those part of the solution too?
They can be. They offer a convenient and often, emissions-free way to get around, especially for shorter trips. But it's important to consider the full life cycle impact, how are they manufactured? What happens to them when they're no longer usable?
Right, because even green technology can have its downsides, I guess. What about, the things we buy? Does that play a role in sustainable cities, too?
Oh, absolutely. Supporting local businesses that prioritize sustainability, choosing products with minimal packaging, and opting for durable goods over disposable ones, these are all things that can make a difference.
So being a conscious consumer is actually a form of, urban activism. I kind of like that.
It really is. And it's not just about what we buy, but what we do with stuff when we're done with it. Recycling and composting are essential, of course, but even better is finding ways to reuse and repair items to keep them in circulation longer.
That reminds me of that saying, one person's trash is another person's treasure.
Exactly. And that mindset is at the heart of the circular economy, which we talked about a little earlier. It's all about moving away from that linear take, make, dispose model to a more circular one where resources are constantly being reused and repurposed.
I'm starting to see how all these little choices, when you multiply them across a whole city, can really create a shift towards sustainability.
Right.
But what about the bigger picture? What role does technology play in making cities more sustainable?
Technology is incredibly powerful, and we're seeing some amazing innovations specifically in sustainable urban development. For example, smart city technologies can optimize traffic flow, reduce energy consumption, and improve waste management.
It sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. Are there any real-world examples of these smart city technologies actually working?
Oh, there are. Cities like Singapore and Barcelona are leading the way, implementing all sorts of smart solutions. They're using sensors and data analytics to monitor everything, from air quality to water usage, and then using that information to make real-time adjustments that improve efficiency and sustainability.
Wow, that's incredible. So it's like having a city that can think for itself and respond to its own needs. But hold on, doesn't all this technology come with its own environmental footprint?
That's a really important point. We can't just ignore the energy consumption and resource use associated with these technologies. But the potential benefits in terms of reducing our overall environmental impact, they can be significant.
It seems like there's always a trade-off, isn't there? How do we find that sweet spot, that balance between technological innovation and being responsible towards the environment?
That's the million-dollar question, right? It's something we're all grappling with. And it's not always easy to find the perfect solution, but I think open dialogue, collaboration, and a willingness to experiment, those are key. We need to be open to new ideas, new approaches, but always keep that bigger picture of sustainability in mind.
It sounds like creating sustainable cities is a constant work in progress then, a process of learning, adapting, and innovating.
It definitely is, and it's a journey we're all on together. Every city, every community, every individual has a role to play.
Well, I have to say, I'm feeling a lot more hopeful than I did at the beginning of this deep dive. Knowing that we can all contribute, even in small ways, it's empowering.
That's the spirit. And remember, it's not just about, saving the planet. It's about creating cities that are more livable, more equitable, more enjoyable for everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what are some key takeaways you hope our listeners will remember?
I hope they come away with a sense of possibility, knowing that sustainable cities aren't just some far-off utopian dream, but something we can actively create. And also understanding that sustainability isn't just about protecting the environment, it's about creating a better quality of life for all of us.
And it's not just about huge, sweeping changes, but also about those small, everyday choices we make.
Exactly. Recognizing that we're all connected and that even our smallest actions can have a ripple effect.
Powerful stuff. Well, I'm excited to hear what else you've got to share in the final part of our deep dive.
We've got some exciting ideas and practical tips coming up, so stay tuned.
All right, welcome back. We've covered so much already, like the whole history of sustainable urban development, how cities are basically their own ecosystems.
And all the cool ways technology and even our everyday choices can make a difference, right?
Totally. But I got to admit, it's been pretty theoretical so far. Now I'm kind of itching to know, what are cities actually doing? Putting all this into action. Got any, inspiring examples?
Oh, yeah, tons. One area where we're seeing amazing stuff is in urban design and planning. Cities are starting to think differently about how they use space, moving away from, that super car-centric layout towards designs that are more people-focused.
So less sprawling concrete and more, walkable, bikeable, livable spaces.
Exactly. Think about cities like Copenhagen or Amsterdam. They've prioritized cycling infrastructure for years, and it's transformed them. They've shown that if you invest in those safe, convenient bike paths, it makes cycling a real option for almost everyone, not just, the hardcore cyclists.
Love that. A city where bikes rule.
Yeah.
What about green space? We talked about how important they are, but are cities actually making more of them?
Yep, and in some really cool ways. There's this huge surge in rooftop gardens and urban farms, which is awesome because it's not just adding greenery. You get fresh food, you reduce that urban heat island effect, and you even create habitats for wildlife.
So it's like bringing a little bit of the countryside right into the city.
Yeah, exactly. And some cities are going even further, They're taking these abandoned industrial sites or old parking lots and turning them into parks or green corridors. Not only does it make the city look better, but it's like an ecological and social win-win.
Wow. Giving those forgotten spaces a whole new purpose.
Yeah.
What about buildings themselves? Are they getting a sustainable makeover too?
Oh, for sure. Green building practices are getting more and more common. Architects and developers are using sustainable materials, energy-efficient designs, even putting renewable energy generation right into the buildings.
So like solar panels on rooftops, rainwater harvesting, maybe even those vertical gardens you see popping up sometimes.
You got it. And the best part is these green buildings aren't just good for the environment. They're often healthier for the people living or working inside, with cleaner air and more natural light.
It's like everyone wins. I'm noticing a trend here. It seems like a lot of these sustainable city solutions are about working with nature, not just trying to control it.
That's a great observation. It's about realizing that nature isn't something separate from our cities. It's a part of them. And the more we can weave those natural elements into our urban spaces, the healthier, more resilient, and just, more pleasant those spaces will be.
I really like that perspective. But let's be real, all these amazing initiatives probably cost a lot, right?
Yeah.
How are cities finding the money to actually do all this?
Yeah, that's a good point. Sustainability often needs some upfront investment, but the long-term benefits, both for the economy and for people, can be huge. A lot of cities are looking at new ways to finance these projects, things like green bonds.
Green bonds, what are those?
They're basically a way for cities to raise money specifically for eco-friendly projects. Investors are getting more and more interested in supporting sustainability, so these bonds have become a popular way to fund things like renewable energy, energy efficiency upgrades, green infrastructure, that kind of stuff.
So it's like investing in a city's future in like a very literal way.
Right. And it's not just government funding either. Private businesses are putting a lot more money into sustainable urban development too. They're realizing that creating more resilient and livable cities can actually be good for business.
That's really encouraging. But even with all this good stuff happening, I imagine there are still challenges, like roadblocks along the way. What are some of the biggest hurdles for cities trying to become more sustainable?
One of the toughest things is just how complex cities are. So many different systems, all tangled together: transportation, energy, water, waste, social services. It's hard to come up with solutions that work for everything.
They're like one giant puzzle, right? All these pieces that need to fit just right.
Exactly. And then there's the whole political and social side of it. Sustainable solutions often need different groups to work together, and that can be tricky.
So it's not just about the ideas, it's about getting everyone on the same page and willing to cooperate.
Absolutely. And sometimes people resist change, especially if it shakes things up or challenges the way things have always been done. But the good news is there are also so many examples of communities coming together and making it work.
Well, I have to say, I'm feeling way more optimistic about the future of our cities now. It's awesome to see all this innovation and creative thinking happening everywhere.
Me too. And remember, it's not just about those big splashy projects, it's the everyday stuff we do too. All those small choices, when millions of people are making them, can have a huge impact.
Yeah, so whether it's biking to work, shopping local, or just speaking up for what we believe in, we can all play a part.
Exactly. And in the end, that's what it's all about, right? Creating cities that are not just sustainable, but also vibrant and equitable, places where everyone can thrive.
Well said. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive into sustainable cities. Hopefully you've learned something new and maybe even feel inspired to get involved and, make a difference in your own community.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep building the cities of the future.